Welcome to part 5 of my continuing series in trying to answer this question: can Bukusu culture afford to be static? This is part 5. Part 1, 2, 3, and 4 can be captured at those links. Yes, being no anthropologist, being no historian, being no expert in culture, in an attempt to answer the question, can Bukusu culture afford to be static, I can only use my own life history. I consulted some documents. I listened to some people as I interviewed them. I observed rituals and ceremonies and analyzed discussions on the Bukusu wall, Bukusu caucus, and therefore used all those to apply my own logic to generate this series of my story. In part 1, I defined culture. In part 2, I traced the migration of the Bukusu from Esbakala in Egypt to Muyala Wamango in Kenya. In part 3, I looked at food as an element of culture. In part 4, I looked at housing and marriage. Now in this part 5, I want to look at circumcision, or the rite of passage for the Bukusu boy child. Yes, I've said it in all my parts that were I to list the key pillars of culture, I will list food, housing and language, clothes, and rituals. Of course, there are others. I choose to list those 4 without belittling the others. So now I want to talk about the rite of passage for the boy child. Circumcision. Now, around the 18th century, Bukusu settled at Muyala, situated in eastern Uganda and across the Kenya-Uganda border. Well, some say 14th century, 15th, 16th. The fact remains that at one time, having trekked from Egypt through Sudan, northern Kenya, down, they came and settled at a spot called Muyala. That signpost is the signpost that indicates the direction of that Muyala. And look at what Edwin Sifuna wrote about it, that the sign to Muyala Wamango cultural site run by National Museums of Kenya, and he says, I dare anyone from the National Museums of Kenya to read it. And he says, shame. Yes. I also think that it is shameful to leave a signpost to a heritage, but that's not my story. If it was to be read, it will show that there is a place called Muyala Wamango. Now, according to my documents, the document that I saw, around 1700, at Muyala in present-day Tesoland of Kenya, lived one Mango Wamalule, who is remembered by the Bukusu due to his unusual courage, which enabled him to use a razor-sharp sword called Embalu in Bukusu to kill a deadly serpent, Endemuyabebe, that had terrorized and killed numerous people, including his own son. This killing of the serpent is recorded to have marked a turning point in the Bukusu circumcision practices. Now, there are some graphic illustrations of mango under the serpent, or endemia meme. Yeah, endemia baby. At that stage, at that link, you see the great, big, gigantic snake, and look at the small man trying to paddle it. There it is again. And there it is again. All these are illustrations found at those links to tell the story of how, Mango fought and killed the serpent. Of course, a number of versions of the Mango story and the circumcision exist, but two stand out. Version 1 says, and this is the adoption version, that circumcision started, the Bukusu circumcision started, when Mango was given a wife by the Barwa, the Saboits, neighbors, as a reward for killing the snake. But the girl refused to sleep with an uncircumcised man. Given the Barwa circumcised, the Saboits circumcised their own, Mango had to be circumcised, and from there on, the Bukusu. That may explain the existence of what like Embalu, Mango, Hweromrua, etc. in the Bukusu circumcision songs. You can check that link for an elaboration. Indeed, even when I was looking at the document from the Esibakala in 6 AD, circumcision was not registered, not recorded. Circumcision only appears at this stage when the Bukusu had reached Muyala wa Mango. So this version indicates that circumcision by the Bukusu was adopted. Version number 2, it is the adaptation version. The Bukusu had been circumcising secretly and privately before this Mango event, so we are told. To emulate the courage of Mango, they started public circumcisions as practiced today, where those being circumcised must show courage in public. So two versions. Bukusu were never being circumcised until 18th, 15th, 16th century. So it was not within their culture, that ritual. Now, whether we believe version 1 or 2, we see that each of them ushered in a turning point in the way of life of the Bukusu. Adoption means the Bukusu, I'm one of them, wholly borrowed circumcision from the Barwa and changed our way of living. But adaptation means we modified our circumcision to fit new circumstances. So either way, circumcision as a ritual changed. The Bukusu borrowed or adapted. Now, the adoption argument is echoed by others. Professor Simiyu, in his A History of Bukusu to 1990, says they, the Bukusu, seem to have adopted the practice, which is circumcision, after Mango got circumcised, when there was a mass circumcision among nearly all the Bakishu under the Bukusu. In Wikipedia, we read, it is thought that they, the Bukusu, adopted the practice, circumcision, from contact with the Kalenjin at Mount Elgon, the Barwa. Others argue, however, that the presence of the practice in the other Luya tribes indicates an earlier adoption before the Bukusu settled at Mount Elgon. The presence of the word adoption in both cases means that it was not our culture. It was not the Bukusu culture, circumcision. So today, even as we hang on it, we know that we borrowed it. And the message is, therefore, culture can change. Culture can be adopted. Culture can be adapted. Culture can be abandoned. Culture can be created. This is the message that we are seeing in this circumcision. Never mind that the circumcision is among the remaining strong elements of culture. Now, let's look at time to circumcise. Before colonialism, the elders determined time for circumcision ceremonies. The colonialists introduced nationally structured education and successfully asked the Bukusu to adapt circumcision periods to the national school calendar. Again, we see here an aspect of cultural dynamism or changing with times. Now, in part 6, I will look at clothing as an element of culture. Remember, I'm building up the stories to answer the question, can Bukusu culture remain static? Can Bukusu people be accused of having changed culture? This came from the event of Huswala Kumtse that I brought in my first part of this story. I will definitely later end with it. So let's watch for part 6.